Okay, so good morning, Shavua Tov, Chodesh Tov. Today I'm going to do something a little different. Instead of having the source sheet and going source by source, I thought that I would speak for about 30-40 minutes. And then we have one source that I printed, which is called the Aggeret Mussar. We would speak about it in the shiur itself. But it's and I wanted us to be able not to only see small bits of it, but maybe to be able to, I don't have to cover all of it, but at least a good chunk of it. And that we'll do in the last 20 minutes of the shiur. That's basically the plan. We'll see what would happen. But that's the plan. So you can focus on me or on your food during the shiur. Rabbi Israel Salanter was born in a city called Zager in Lithuania. So we are speaking about Lithuanian Jewry, which is a very special type of Yahadut. And at least those of us coming from South Africa, I think they all trace themselves back, or may all, but most, yeah, trace themselves back to Lithuania. So it's also, I guess, close to home for some of us. And what specialized this form of Yahadut was especially, we may say, the focus on the intellectual activity, usually in Torah learning. Obviously, the Vilna Gaon was a big part of that character of the Lithuanian Jews as focusing on, as I said, on the intellectual, on the rational, on the and on these parts, but he also is a product of the Lithuanian worldview. He's not only a former, meaning forming this worldview, is also a product of it. And that's so, but that's the type. So that's why Hasidut does not penetrate so deep into, there were some Hasidic holdouts, but does not penetrate so deep into Lithuania, not only because the Gaon for them. One man, as powerful as he may be, would not be able to stop something that, if it would have been natural to the Jews of the place. The reason why Hasidut was not able to go very deep into Lithuania was because they were of a different mindset. So they appreciated Torah learning, they appreciated, I mean, the view of, I would almost say, elitism was very strong, that you have the Torah scholars, you have the Talmidei Chachamim, and they're on a higher level than anyone else, and they are being respected by everyone else, and everyone understands that Torah learning is the focal point of what being a Jew means. Now that was the typical lines of a Lithuanian Jew. Now, as I said, Rabbi Israel of Salanter is born into that type of environment in 1810, and his father is a Rav of cities, going beyond between cities, and he's a Rav in them. Is also is a Mefaresh. His commentary on the Shas and on the Arbaturim was printed in the Vilna editions that were printed more or less at the same time. And the child is being seen as an Ilui, and in the age of 12, he goes from Zager, where he learned by his father, to the big yeshiva in Salanter. That's how he became Rabbi Israel Salanter, that is Rabbi Israel of Salanter. Now, he was not born in Salanter, he was born in Zager, but because he learned in Salanter, he received the nickname Salanter. So Rabbi Israel Salanter, his real last name was Lipkin, Israel Lipkin. But as I said, he's known as Rabbi Israel Salanter, or Rabbi Israel Salanter. And so at the age of 12, he's going to Salanter. And at the ripe age of 14, he's getting married with with the daughter of one of the gvirim, of the rich man, the Jewish rich man in Salanter. So, and he's seen by everyone as a Talmid Chacham. Up to here, everything is pretty normal and typical, and that would not be enough in order to make it for a shiur. However, he had an additional, how would I say it, twist with him. And that was, he thought that learning Torah by itself is not enough in order to straighten the character, the traits of a person. Now that is in contra to the typical belief in the Lithuanian system, which is, we say it in Hebrew, Shev tilmad yeh beseder. Sit down, learn Torah, and everything will be fine. That will solve all of the problems. That includes financial problems, that includes health problems, and supposedly it should also include your midot problem, right? How do you behave? And if you are learning Torah as Torah should be learned, then you are supposed to be a perfect human being. And Rabbi Israel Salanter stands up at the age of, say, 14, 15, and he says, I apologize, it just does not happen. And what he sees around him, and that's a complaint that comes again and again throughout Jewish history, and that is that the people that learn Torah, they may be wonderful people, they learn Torah, it's excellent, but it doesn't necessarily mean they also corrected their desires. It doesn't mean that they were able to become human beings that is just nice to be around. And sometimes someone can be a great Torah scholar, it's unfortunately, but sometimes they can be met, that someone that learns a lot of Torah and is able to give you a very good shiur, but also in his shiur or in other, when you would talk with him, he would come down on other people and with hubris, and that's in a way that seems to be a very far cry to what we would expect from a Torah scholar. And that's a discrepancy that Israel Salanter is a young man, but he is pointing to. And now usually in the yeshiva you'd say something like that, they will tell you, sit and learn, it will be fine. And if you learn enough, you'd also understand the answer to this question. But he is not willing to give up. He says, no, I want to better myself. He begins by the desire to better himself. And he says, I have problems, I have trait problems, I have whatever it would be, anger or pride, and I want to solve my problems. And learning another page in Baba Kama doesn't do it for me. So he's continuing his learning in the yeshiva, but he's also finding himself another Rabbi. And the Rabbi that he found to himself is a very interesting person that, you know, could have been given a shiur to himself, but we cannot speak about every person in the 19th century. So we'll just give 5 minutes about him now. His name was Rabbi Yosef Zundel of Salanter, also Salanter, not because he's in any way relative to Rabbi Israel Salanter, but because he was also from Salanter. So his name was Rabbi Yosef Zundel of Salanter. He himself was a student of Reb Chaim of Volozhin, and if you remember, Reb Chaim of Volozhin was a student of the Vilna Gaon. So we have here a very prominent figure, again, in the Lithuanian mythology, if I may say so. So he is a student of Reb Chaim of Volozhin. Reb Chaim of Volozhin is a student of the Gaon of Vilna. And Rabbi Yosef Zundel of Salanter is sitting there in Salanter, and he is not willing to take any rabbinical position, although he can easily be a Rosh Yeshiva or a Rav. He is not willing to do so. He is, there are different accounts. Some say that he was a trader, a businessman. Some say that he was a shoemaker. But I think all of these, I mean, it may have been both that and that, a shoemaker or a businessman. These are words. Nowadays, a businessman is like something very respectful. But back then, that meant just someone that is going from place to place and trading, a peddler. So that it was not something that was considered mi yodea ma. So the point of this story is to say that he was walking like a simple man. And the story goes that one day Rabbi Israel of Salanter is walking there. Again, he's a 14, 15 years old boy, and he's walking there in the city. And he's seeing this, let's say he's a shoe carpenter. So he's seeing this shoe carpenter, and he's a shoemaker, and he looks at him, and then he asks a friend, who is this man? And the friend says, this is Zundel. And Rabbi Israel asked him, why do you call him Zundel? Back then, everyone would be called a Reb. That was like, you were born a male, then you would be called a Reb. So how it comes to be that he doesn't even, you know, deserve this title? Then the friend says, you're just a shoemaker. He's again, that's the Lithuanian approach. He's nothing. And Rabbi Israel of Salanter says to his friend, you know, I watched him carefully in the last 20 minutes. I didn't see him doing anything that is neither a mitzvah or a requirement by halacha. And I saw that all of his acts, he was paskening like the Rambam. Just in two things that he did, it was like the Ravid. So you see both the way that Rabbi Israel of Salanter had an eye, a sharp eye to see people, but you also see that this Rabbi Yosef Zundel of Salanter was a very humble person, was also a very sharp, accurate, not doing anything that is not needed or required. And Rabbi Israel of Salanter begins to, we cannot even say being a student, because Yosef Zundel did not have a yeshiva. He was not teaching shiurim. He was just living his life according to what he thought a person should live. And Rabbi Israel of Salanter is beginning to follow him and to try and learn from him and from his ways. And some not simple relationship is being developed. And the story goes that one day, Rabbi Yosef Zundel looks at Rabbi Israel and says to him, what do you want? And Rabbi Israel says to him, I want to become a better man. And Rabbi Yosef Zundel tells him, then you should go and learn Mussar and be a mensch. Now, for us, I don't know, I'm hearing this sentence, it doesn't sound to me as a very earth-shattering, paradigm-changing saying. But nonetheless, Rabbi Israel Salanter had that, and according to all of the accounts of the students of Rabbi Israel of Salanter, who retold them the story, for him it was a life-changing event. He was like reborn. Because Rabbi Yosef Zundel told him that the key, the way to become a better person is by learning Mussar. Right? He told him, go learn Mussar and be a mensch. So the way is by learning Mussar. And then Rabbi Israel Salanter decided that he is going to dedicate himself to learning Mussar and to improving his personality, basically. And in the beginning, it was a private affair. And he said to himself, I would not be a Rav, I would not be a teacher, just like my Rebbe, Rabbi Yosef Zundel of Salanter, I would be I have some simple trade. And in order to do so, he understood that he needs to learn things by heart, because you didn't have a smartphone and you couldn't hear podcasts. So in order to learn Torah, either that you sit by a book, but if you are walking, you cannot sit by a book. Then you need to know everything by heart. So he began to learn the Shas by heart. So he would be able to be like his Rebbe. But now, according to the stories, after finishing half of the Shas, already knowing half of the Shas by heart, he had a change of heart. And that is, he understood that it is not enough that he would better himself, because he looked around him and he said, the Jewish world around me has a problem. It's lacking. It's wanting. It's lacking in the department of improving ourselves, becoming better people. We are, the Lithuanian Jew is learning Torah, is more or less observing the mitzvot, at least ben Adam lamakom, the mitzvot that has to do with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But in the department of ben Adam lechaveiro, we are in a deficit. And it would not be, if I would just improve myself, that in itself is a moral defect. If you are careless about the status of other people, then that is a lack in you yourself. That was his idea, a very interesting idea. So he abandoned the plan to become a simple man and understood that he needs to change the Jewish world to that extent, to change the Jewish world. And in 1838, so when he was 28, his rabbi, this Rabbi Yosef Zundel of Salanter, make Aliyah to Yerushalayim. We have some more stories about him in Yerushalayim. As I said, it can maybe wait for another opportunity. And Rabbi Israel of Salanter remains alone in Salanter. And now it's time to begin applying his program to change the Jewish world. Now, how that can be done? How that can be done? So he understood that in Lithuania, in order to be taken seriously, you need to make a name for yourself as a Talmud genius. Otherwise, that is nothing. You can give the beautiful drasha in shul, but it would be a darshan. Now, a darshan is, I mean, people would put money in your hat, but that would not really enable you to change people's minds. So he understood he needs to reveal his abilities in what we call pilpul, meaning in the ability to ask questions and answer answers and bring a proof from here and proof from there. And basically the idea is you should give a shiur that no one can understand, and then that means that you are the best lamdan. Now, obviously that's a gaive, right? That's a sort of pride. That's something that he really opposed. But he said, I must put it into use in order to acquire the name, the reputation that would later enable me to really teach them what I want to teach. Because after they would have to admit that I'm a Torah scholar, a Talmudic scholar, then when I would also teach them what they should do, they would be open to listen. And it's very interesting to read because, again, we have almost nothing from him, only letters. But we have many, many stories from his students and stories that he told them, usually. And they almost in all of the accounts, it being told again and again that before giving a shiur, he would think to himself, how much should he reveal from what he knows? I mean, he would not give the best shiur he can, because that's just gaiva, that's pride. So he would reduce the amount of knowledge that he would show off to them, what he thought was the exact amount needed in order to impress the people of the city, so they would listen to him, and then he can give them the Mussar. So again, very, very, very interesting. According to the stories, there was once that he came to a certain city. Now, the way that he would give the shiurim was, he would go to the city, and he would write the mare mekomot, meaning the sources, but you don't write the Gemara. So you write, Chulin Membet Amud Bet, Rambam Avot Atuma Gimel Daled, etc. So you write a list of mare mekomot, of sources, and you would glue them on the announcement board, and on Shabbat morning people would come after they learned the mekorot, and then you'd give the shiur based on the mekorot that they prepared. I just imagine I would put your sources and people would prepare, and then I would give a shiur on Shabbat morning, yeah, of course. But, there was no TV back then, so people had time. And that's the way, again, Lithuania, we have to understand, it was really a very literate place. And, okay, fine. So he's coming and he's putting his page. Now, there was someone there that was a jester, right, a clown, a leitzan, and he replaced the page that Rabbi Israel Salanter had put, and replaced it with different list of sources which has nothing to do with one another, right? One on Purim, one on Chanukah, one on Levaya, and one on Brit Milah. Fine. And he puts it there. And according to the story, Rabbi Israel Salanter comes on Shabbat morning, and he takes the source list, and he looks at it, and it's not the source that he put, but everyone prepared the sources that were out there. Obviously, the goal was to shame him, right? To embarrass him. So the story says the following: he went to the bima, he looked at the page for 5 minutes, and then he gave a wonderful shiur, connecting all the different sources that were given. Now the students, and that's a typical Mussar idea. Now the student continues and says, now up till now that was the story from Israel Salanter. Now the student says, it's not that Rabbi Israel Salanter waited for 5 minutes because he needed 5 minutes. He was able to give the shiur immediately. He needed 5 more minutes in order for people to think that he needs to prepare, because he didn't want to show himself off as someone that can immediately give a shiur on different sources. And here you see that's the way that these people are thinking. So they are always trying to find even in the most minor details, the moralistic lesson. Okay, so he would give the shiur. So he would go from city to city in Lithuania. He would give the shiur. People would be very impressed. And then on, let's say, Shabbat afternoon, or in the end of the drasha in the morning, he would begin to speak about Mussar. Now, what Mussar is? What Mussar is? What he is really trying to speak about? Basically, 2 things. One is the need to keep halacha in all fields of halacha. and B, most importantly, in the fields of בין אדם לחברו. So he would speak about the details and the importance of keeping the details of halacha everywhere, but he would focus mainly on בין אדם לחברו and on cases in which it may clash with what would perceive as halacha. I would give two stories to exemplify that. One story is about Rabbi Israel of Salanter coming to us. So he would go from city to city. As you can understand, he was hosted by many, many people, and we have many stories from him being hosted. So in one of the stories, he's coming, and the gvir of the Ayara says to him, please come to my place. And I would host you. Fine. Rabbi Israel Salanter comes in, and but Rabbi Israel Salanter says, I have one condition. What is, oh, fine, beautiful. What is the condition? Says the condition is that I am deciding when we go from course to course, meaning in the meal. Right? So you give the fish. When I say we go to meat, when I say we go. Now the Balabait was sure that Rabbi Israel Salanter would want a very long seudah with divrei Torah, with songs. Okay, beautiful, beautiful. They sit in, and Rabbi Israel Salanter begins to rush. So he says, you eat the fish, 5 minutes, and it's the next course. 5 minutes, the next course, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, he finished the whole meal. The Balabait sits there. What just happened? And then Rabbi Israel Salanter says, I want to teach you something. And he calls in. Now back then, there were servants. People were using servants. So there was a maid there, a woman. That she herself was a widow, so she didn't have her own Shulchan Shabbat. But her children were at home, and she would go in order to make some money. She would work as the servant in this rich man's home. And so Rabbi Israel Salanter called the servant, this woman, and he's asking her, I want to apologize that I was rushing you. And the woman told him, no, chas v'chalila, you shouldn't apologize. You know, every Shabbat, I am only waiting for the minute that the meal would be over, and I would be able to go back to my children, and maybe they would still be awake, and I would be able to sit with them for Seudat Shabbat, at least for a few minutes. And when the meals are long, then I miss them completely. And Rabbi Israel Salanter told the Baal Habayit, it's more important for you to enable the servant, right, the maid, to go back to her children than sit and give another song or give another Dvar Torah. So that's the type of morals that he would give. Another very famous story. It's a story already from the time he was in Vilna, but I would tell it now. So there was a cholera pandemic, and a very serious disease. And part of what happens there is that people get hydrated. It's very important to drink. If you are contracting the virus, it's very, very important to drink. And there was Yom Kippur. And there was a whole discussion between the Rabbanim, should people fast, should not the people fast? Fine, and they reached whatever conclusion they reached. Now, Rabbi Israel Salanter did not carry any formal position back then. So he was not part of the decision committee. He went up to the bima of the shul, of the central shul in Vilna, on Yom Kippurim, with a cookie and wine, and made a kiddush, and made the kiddush on the wine and ate the cookie on Yom Kippurim. And it seems that it was against the opinion of the Rav of the shul, but he felt that it's pikuach nefesh, and even against the opinion of the Rav of the shul, he must do what he feels is correct. As you can imagine, that caused a great storm. And again, the story goes, I don't know if the story is correct, but the story goes that in order to quiet the noise after Yom Kippurim, he gave a shiur. And this time, he completely revealed everything that he was able to give, and then no one ever said anything. I know Jews enough to know that whatever shiur you'd give, I don't think that everyone was quiet after that. But fine, that's the story. Okay, the story is beautiful. So that's basically what he was trying to achieve. On one hand, it is very modest. I mean, we are not speaking about revolutions. No one would say that ben Adam lechavero, right, that human relationships are not important. No one would say lashon hara is a mitzvah and ve'ahavta lerecha kamocha is a mitzvah, and all the rest. No one disagrees about that. But the question is the question of focus. What do you put the focus on? Who do you admire? Do you admire the people that are the sharpest, that have the best minds, that can give the best shiur? Or do you admire the people that are the kindest, that are gomlei chasadim? And again, you can tell me, oh, why do we have to choose? We can admire both. Yes, you can. But a culture has its heroes. And the question, in the end, who do you put on the pedestal? Who is being madlika masu'a, right? That's, in the end, that's a question. And he was all for trying to advance the cause of morals, of what we maybe call today ethics. They didn't call it ethics back then, but Mussar. All of the time that he was doing that, as you can hear, he was not working. So he was living from his wife. Now his wife came from a very rich family. However, as happens many times, his father-in-law fell out of business, and she was working. She was conducting a business of herself, the wife, in order to support him and the children. At 1840, when he was 30, the business of his wife collapsed. As happened. We have to understand, back then, there are no safety nets. There are no central banks that try to stop inflation. There is no quantitative, it's called easing, and quantitative easing. No, nothing of that sort. It's just pure capitalism. And if you're on the horse, you're on the horse, and if you're falling down, the horse trumps you. That's what it is. No social security. So if you fail, you fail. No one would stop. No one would give you dmei avtala. Nothing. And so there was no choice now, and he had to accept the position of Rosh Yeshiva. He left Salanter. He went to Vilna, as I said. And here, now that he has a formal position, he wants to begin to advance his cause. And he is beginning to, as I said, speak with the people, trying to advance, trying to convince the Balei Batim to join him. He's also have a very interesting initiative. He is founding what is called a Beit Mussar, a house of moral. Now, what is a Beit Mussar? He understood, and we would speak about that Be'ezrat Hashem as we would read the letter, he understood that just speaking about Mussar, giving a nice drasha, would not really advance anything. In order to change someone's personality, you need a constant work. Now, what constant work should be done? Do you remember the advice that was given to him by his Rabbi Yosef Zundel Salant? Learn Mussar. So there are certain sefarim that we consider the Sifrei Mussar. Back earlier than Rabbi Israel Salant, right? You can speak about Chovat HaLevavot. It's almost 1,000 years before Rabbi Israel Salant. We can speak about the Mesilat Yesharim, the Ramchal, which was only 100 years before. So there are different Sfarim that were written along the generations. No one of them created a movement. They were just Sfarim on the bookshelf. But now Rabbi Israel Salant comes and he says, I would create a movement that would use these Sefarim. And because in the yeshivot, they didn't see it with a kind eye, that people would begin to open other Sfarim other than Shas or Shulchan Aruch, etc. Then he said, I would build specific houses. Doesn't need to be a whole house. You can say it's a shtibel, it's a room. Right? Special rooms to which a person can come and learn Mussar. Now, what does it mean to learn Mussar? Learn Mussar is not an intellectual endeavor. It's very important to understand, because intellectual, there was enough. That was not he was trying to contribute to. He said, our problem is the gap, the lack of communication between the intellect and the heart. So what I really want is not only to impact the intellect, I want to impact the heart. So in learning Mussar, we do not mean acquiring new knowledge. I mean, I don't need to teach you that don't speak Lashon Hara. We all heard it 1,000 times. It still doesn't work. So the problem is not with learning about Lashon Hara. The problem is somehow internalizing this learning. Now, his idea was that in order to internalize something, you have to act. And now he is one, in the Jewish world, maybe he's the first to use psychology in the modern sense. That is, he understood that there is a difference between what you think and the subconscious. And he said many times we are being governed by our subconscious rather than we think that we think. We think that we are deciding, but really we are guided by our subconscious. He called them kochot kehim. So they are like the dark forces, but it doesn't mean really dark in the meaning of evil. It means dark in the meaning that they are unknown to us. So there are the dark forces and the bright forces. That is, again, that is the muda, the conscience, and the subconscious. And he said, in order to affect the subconscious, you need to do things with your body and with your emotions, not with your intellect. The intellect do not really control the heart, but you can affect the heart. How do you do that? He says, for example, if you take a sentence from one of the Mussar books. Let's say it says in the Mussar book, everyone who speaks lashon hara falls into Gehenna. Well, I can find you such sentences if you want. Sit down and for 30 minutes repeat this sentence aloud with a tune and get yourself completely into it. You're not learning anything new, but you are affecting your soul, you are affecting your subconscious. Next time you try to speak lashon hara, it's not that your mind would know that you are doing something wrong. Not only that, your heart would immediately feel that everyone who speaks lashon hara falls into Gehenna. So that was the way that he was trying to affect the psychology. Now, as the Mussar movement developed in the next generations after Rabbi Salanter, they found other ways as well. But for him, that was the main path. What was really important is it's not the details of how exactly it's being done, because it was not a great hit, by the way. People, it seems, were not very keen on going to a room, sitting to themselves and saying, I would go to Gehenna, I would go to Gehenna for 30 minutes. It doesn't make people cheerful. So giving a breakfast is much better. so it didn't really catch. But the idea, he was trying. That is also very important. This was a new thing, but he was not afraid of trying and maybe failing and then trying something else. He also understood that because what he's really doing is trying to affect psychology, he understood that he's also allowed, permitted to learn from the goyim, from non-Jews, because why not? Human psychology is human psychology. So one of the Mussar books that he was using, it's very interesting, was a book that was called Cheshbon HaNefesh. The way that the book works is that you take the year, you divide it to months and to days, and you are having specific workouts, Mussar workouts for every day, and then you have checkouts and checkups and exams, etc. So you're building to yourself like a workout session. Now, who is the source of this sefer? The source for Rabbi Israel Salanter was a maskil named Reb Menachem Mendel Lipin. I would not right now comment about his commitment to Torah and mitzvot or observance, because it's in dispute between historians. So who are we to decide? Let's judge everyone favorably. But he himself was also not the source. The source, incidentally enough, was the Almanac by Benjamin Franklin, who was a very interesting person in his own right. I would not give a shiur about him, but a very interesting person in his own right. So he wrote that as a self-improvement guidance, a very American thing, by the way, self-help books, right? So he wrote that as a self-guide, a self-help book to improve yourself. And that was imported to the continent, to the Jewish continent, by this Menachem Mendel Lipin, and then was orthodoxized by Rabbi Israel. Now he knew exactly well where it is coming from. But if it is good, it's a mean to an end. The end is keeping halacha, the end is becoming a better person. Why should I care what are the source of the means? I should care what are the source of the ends I have. I should not care if it's a tool, it's like a computer, we would say. It's a technology. So that was very interesting. It's not that he was walking around saying, I am learning things from Benjamin Franklin, but and not that he would say Benjamin Franklin, anyone there would know, meaning his state would know who is he. But it's interesting. It's interesting that he was open to this type of ideas. Now, okay, exactly. That brings us to the next part. and that is the Haskalah in Lithuania. We are already in the mid of the 19th century. And in the mid of the 19th century, the Haskalah in Lithuania is a very interesting phenomenon. It was not received with objection because, as I said, the Lithuanians saw them, always they pride themselves as being very intellectual, so very truth-driven. If there is something that you can learn and you can advance, that's beautiful. So Haskalah crept in, I may say, without almost any opposition, even from the rabbis. And you may recall that the Gra himself was in favor of learning geometry and algebra, etc. So everything was beautiful. But the problem is that with Haskalah came also not only the means, the tools, the technologies, but came also the ideas and the values. And because the Lithuanian Jews were always focused on Torah in the sense of halacha, of mitzvot, of learning, they were not really equipped to deal with the influence of these new foreign ideas and values. And something, you can say unfortunate, sad, it depends, I guess, on your point of view, but tragic happened, and that is that in a few decades, you went in Lithuania, it was a very sharp movement that people went from being observant to being completely not observant. Because it was like a virus, a Trojan horse that went undetected into the system. And when they recognized the mistake, it was already too late. And again, the DNA of the Lithuanian Jewry did not allow them almost to oppose ideas, to oppose books. In Poland, in Russia, that was very acceptable. To ban books, it's fine. Not so in Lithuania. We are the people that pride themselves on being able to engage intellectually with everything. We are not afraid. Well, it seems that there are reasons to be afraid sometimes. And that the whole system went into collapse. That's really what happened. You can read very nice descriptions of Lithuania in which every balagule, that is the carriage, right, the horse rider, everyone knows the shas. I mean, before World War II, that was not the situation at all in Lithuania, and also not during closing to the end of the 19th century. That's the truth. That's the sad truth. And yeshivot were closing down, and people were just stopping being observant. And now that's the process as it continued. Now I return to the beginning of the process. The maskilim wanted to open a bet midrash for maskilim, right, to maskilic rabbis in Vilna. Now, some of the rabbis were in favor because, again, they didn't necessarily understood what is going on. Maybe you may say they were like the modern Orthodox of nowadays. So they thought that, yes, why not? We are also incorporating the new ideas, the new technology. Beautiful. But you need to know how to engage that. And if you do not have not only a sound base, but also if you do not understand the level of ideas that are being spoken, and if you are not on the same field, then in the end, it's becoming something people know how to do the mitzvot, but all their values and beliefs are coming from foreign sources. And that's really what happened. But again, it was not recognized immediately in the beginning. So the maskilim wanted to open a bet midrash. Some of the rabbis of the city asked Rabbi Israel Salanter to become part of the bet midrash, being the head, being the Talmud teacher. The maskilim thought that such a man who understands the need for a change in Jewish society, that understands that Torah learning is not everything, right? That you need also human values. So he's the perfect person to head such a bet midrash. But Rabbi Israel Salanter understood that in the end, he and them are on very different places. He was extremely observant. I mean, do not be mistaken. There is one very beautiful story about him standing and giving a drasha in shul, and he is holding the stender, right? And suddenly understood there is a pen on the stender, and he lost his conscience immediately because he understood that he moved the muktzeh on Shabbat. So again, the story correct or not, but this is the type of stories that they tell about him. he and them really could not live in the same, under the same roof. That's the truth. And because there was a very strong pressure on him to become part of this Bet Midrash, in the end he left Vilna and he went to Kovna, another very big Lithuanian city. Now in Kovna, it changed the nature of his activity. He understood that he is not able to catch the balei batim. Right? The regular people, they do not come to his Mussar house, and they have their own life. But he understood that really in Lithuania, if you want to influence, then the way to do it is through the yeshivot system. Because all the good boys are being sent to yeshivot. If you influence the yeshivot, then afterwards, a decade, in a generation or two, it would go to all of the Jewish society. So he began to work not with the regular people, but more with yeshiva students. He collected a group around him, so they became like more of a court, less of a, it was now less facing everyone, more of a closed group, an elite group itself, which brought with it, as you can imagine, opposition, because in the minute you're closing yourself, then people begin to ask what's going on there. But it's some very, very, very good students. And he was working on, again, improving his system, improving his methods. And as I said, he was not afraid of being wrong and correct himself. He always kept the same end. But what exactly would be the path depends on what works and what not works. What doesn't work. In 1858, as he was 48, he left Kovna and went to Germany. Now, no one really knows why. No one really knows. He had a very good thing going on. There were students sitting, learning from him. No one really knows why did he leave. I think that according to the prevailing position by the modern historians, he left because he had some type of a depression and he needed to get away from everything going on in Lithuania and with his students and everything. He needed to clean his head and he went to Germany. But so he was there without his family for about a year, and then he decided he would stay. And they asked him, why do you stay? And his answer was, when the horses are going downhill, there is no way to stop them. But after they already reached the bottom, then you can begin to work on getting them back up. By which he meant to say, in Lithuania right now, it's a complete collapse. There's nothing I can do to stop the collapse. But in Germany, everything is already lost. So now we can begin to work to build again. And that's a very interesting insight that we see sometimes in history, that when there is a process, when there is a historical dynamic, it's very difficult to oppose a live, active historical process. But it is correct. After things have settled down, no one hates anyone anymore because no one even remembers what was in the beginning. Now you can begin to work to build the new. So he remained in Germany, he continued to work there, and he kept connection with students by letters. These letters were later collected to the Sefer Or Israel, which is the only thing written that we have from Israel Salanter. For us, that is an advantage that he went to Germany, and these letters survived. Now, he paid a high personal price because he was not with his children. So two of them had, he was the founder of the Mussar movement, but two of his children did not remain as he wanted them to be. One completely left the field, left the Derech. That was his oldest son. And another young son was, I think he was still observant, but he became a doctor for mathematics. And the Maskilim used him as an example to show, here you see, Rabbi Israel, the great Rabbi Israel Salanter also believed in giving secular education to his children, see that his child is a mathematician. He made some formula, how to translate from a circular power energy to linear, I guess, energy, right? Like what happens in the engine, right? So in the engine, there it's the other way around. But so there is a formula on his name. It's the Lipkin formula. It's called on his name to this day. So seems a very bright young man, but he didn't. It seems that his father was really not happy with his ways, and as I said, the Muslim were using him as an example. So Rabbi Israel found it necessary. This is a very sad thing, but he found it necessary to publish an ad in one of the big Jewish letters of the time, in which he says, "I wanted to be known that I am not satisfied and happy with the path that my son have chosen, and I unfortunately am not able to influence him, but if there is someone that can influence him, it would do me a great favor." Yeah, as I said, he paid a very high price for leaving his family and for doing everything that he have done, and he's not the only Jewish leader we know that suffered this fate. Unfortunately, the son died in a very young age, at the age of 30, while Israel Salanter was still alive. That's what it was. At the age of 70, Rabbi Israel thought that he had done what he could in Germany. He installed some of his students as rabbanim there, and he went to France. He was in Paris for 2 years, and then he felt that he's too old. He felt that he was too old, he cannot work anymore. He returned to Germany, to Königsberg. He made one last big trip, going throughout all of Europe, visiting all of his students in the different yeshivot. I mean, his students established yeshivot, established batei knesiot. He really had a network of people following him, and he visited all of them and spoke with them, and then he returned to Königsberg and died in the age of 73. And unfortunately, we didn't even begin to read the Mussar letter. Let's just read the first paragraph. Five minutes, Bezrat Hashem. Two sides, yeah, but we would be able only to do this first 7 or 8 lines. But you can take it home. By the way, there is free. Just write Ageret המוסר in English. Maybe if I would remember, I would send the link. And there is a very nice translation that was done, so you can read the whole thing in English. האדם חפשי בדמיונו ואסור במושכלו. Man is free in his imagination, but he is shackled by his mind, by his knowledge. Now you think that free is good and shackled is bad. That's not the Mussar way. Free is bad and committed is good. So imagination is negative, because by imagining you can think that you can do anything and you can run away. There will be no consequences. You do whatever you want. You would live whatever lifestyle you want to lead, and there will be no consequences, because that's imagination. That's movies. I know it's movies. You can be a hero, you can be a superhero, you can jump from a building and you'd not fall. You'd continue to fly. That's imagination. But asur במושכלו, your knowledge, your mind, your brain gives you the lines. דמיונו מוליכו שובב בדרך רצונו. Your imagination would walk you שובב, meaning naughty, it also means everywhere. בדרך רצונו, according to the desire. בל יחת מהעתיד הוודאי. So the imagination is never worried. It's never afraid. It's always happy. Always clear skies. יפקוד השם על כל מפעליו ובשפטים קשים יבשר. But the imagination would not show you what would happen, right? When the punishment would come. בא ילכד זר בגללו, הוא לבדו יספר חטאו. The imagination would tell you, no, you would blame someone else. There is no way to blame someone else in the final judgment. Everyone stands to himself. אחד הוא עושה העבירה והנענש. The one who made the sin, he would be the one to get punished. midai, that's the way of the world. בל יאמר האדם זה חולי ואשאנו. Now, man may say to himself, okay, I can stand the punishment. Again, it's so nice to eat the cookie. The consequences are negligible. I would be able to survive them. He says, פגעי התבל מצערים המה למכביר מול עונשי העבירות, תגאל נפש האדם למדי, יום לשנה. He says the suffering from sins. And again, you can speak about suffering in the next world, which is what he mainly is focusing on, but also in this world. I mean, someone can... okay, we have every example. It's everyone who speak his own example, right? But someone can live throughout his life, and let's say he would say, "I'm focusing on my career. I'm focusing on making money, and my family. They're important. But every time I have a phone call from work, I am answering the phone call. And when I'm in work and my child is calling me, I'm not answering because I'm in work. And you can do it for 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, 40, 50 years. But the chickens would come home to roast, as they say, right? Because it would come back. It could, and then it would be a suffering, and there would be nothing that you can do. In the imagination, you can do everything. You can work 12 hours a day, and you can be with your family 10 hours a day, and you can be with your everything in the imagination. But you have to consult with your mind in order to understand what is moral and what can be done and what cannot be done. Oy la dimion oyev hara. See how much is against imagination. Again, in our modern environment, imagination is like, yeah, imagination, imagine, what can you do, and free yourself. That's so much against what he is standing for. Oy la dimion oyev hara leze. מידינו הוא בכוחנו להרחיקו, but we can distance him. בתיתנו אוזן קשבת אל השכל. We should listen to the mind. That's so contrary to everything taught by current culture. Right? You can be everything, you know, you cannot be everything you want. It's better for you to be what you need to be, what is right to be. Don't teach your children to be whatever they want to be. No, sometimes people have wants that are not good, that are bad, that are corrupted. No, you cannot do whatever you want. Just fly in the sky and no. That's not the lesson that we should give. And not the lesson that we should incorporate in our own acts. We are not free to do whatever we want. We have commitments. We have commitments to God. We have commitments to human beings. And moral is not do what you want. Moral is do what needs to be done. להשכיל על דבר אמת, לחשוב שכר עבירה נגד הפסדה. So we need to think, we need to understand, to calculate. What do we earn by an עבירה? What do we lose? What do we earn by a mitzvah? What do we lose? ומה נעשה? הדמיון נחל שוטף. The imagination is like a river that sweeps everything with it. A tsunami, we would say today. Everything is being swept away by the force of desire. והשכל יטבע. The mind would lose against the imagination, unless אם לא נוליכנו באונייה. We need to put it in a boat. Right? So if there is like a float by the imagination, we need a boat. And what is the boat? רגשת הנפש וסערת הרוח. It needs to be guided by the feeling of the soul. Again, the intellect alone is not enough, because the intellect against the imagination would lose. That's what happened with every child. Imagination is always stronger than the sechel, right? the mind. But what you need to teach is not only how to be smarter. That would not help. You need him to feel what is good. So education should not only focus on expanding the intellect and the knowledge and the analytical abilities, all the beautiful things that Lithuanian Jewry had to offer. It must also work on psychology, on making the person a better man. Now, again, he had his own ideas about psychology. It may be that nowadays we have, in some areas, advanced. I don't think that you would see any problem with that, because, as I said, he himself was very open to learning from other people and for correcting himself when he saw that the path was wrong. But what was important for him was that we would not limit ourselves to teaching. We must be educators. And that is to children, and more important, obviously, if you want to be an educator, is your first eductee, you may say that, right? The first one to educate is yourself. And that is the great lesson that Rabbi Israel Salanter has to teach us. And again, there is much more to say, but our time is, as always, limited. As he himself would say, in the imagination, you can print all of that and imagine what you can do, but real life are what they are. So thank you so much. and Be'ezrat Hashem will continue next week.
Thank you, Rabbi.